One late night in December 2011, I sat watching the cover sheet of the Northumberland manuscript, staring at the triangles. I was stuck and didn't know what to make of this structure. I read all words on the sheet over and over again. Every word and letter seemed to fit with the background and the content of the bundle of documents. Names, title of place, and devices repeated small words. But I found one very peculiar sentence in the lower part of the triangles. End of the hall, Asmund and Cornelia revealing day through every cranny peeps and. These words seemed to be written close together in the same size, as if belonging together. Asmund and Cornelia was commonly believed to be an unknown play, and revealing day through every cranny peeps was a sentence from Shakespeare's poem, The Rape of Lucrece. The word hall in the end of the hall is positioned very close to Asmund, as if John Davis of Hereford wanted to point out that these two sentences are meant to be understood together. So is Asmund and Cornelia at the end of the hall, the final stage. Then underneath this we have revealing day through every cranny peeps and. Then maybe You're by Thomas Nash, or alternatively You're William Shakespeare. The word spies from Rape of Lucrece is exchanged to peeps, which means looking. Maybe this could be understood as, the end of the hall, the final stage, is Asmund and Cornelia. It reveals day by peeping through every cranny. This could mean strain your eyes on small openings, crannies, and. The and seems to suggest we should continue the sentence. If we continue the and sentence from Rape of Lucrece, and writes with the approximate same size of characters and direction as the and on a Northumberland manuscript cover sheet, we get seems to point her out where she sits weeping. This can of course be an unintended feature, but it is interesting that the immediate extension of the poem points to something. So can we find a message here saying, the final stage, Asmund and Cornelia reveals day through straining your eyes on small openings, and seems to point her out, You're William Shakespeare. It is impossible to know for sure, of course, if this structure is intended or a product of our mind, but let's investigate this title, Asmund and Cornelia, which some scholars think is a lost play by Shakespeare. A Lover's Complaint is a poem in the last section of the Shakespeare Sonnets, a book which on the title page claimed to have been printed by Thomas Thorpe in 1609. The Stationer's Register from that period has an entry for this publication on the 20th of May 1609, so that year is probably correct. The Lover's Complaint consists of 47 7-line stanzas, written in rhyme real. This meter and structure was old-fashioned in Shakespeare's time, but was still used in some occasions by John Davis of Hereford, orchestra, and also in Shakespeare's poem, The Rape of Lucrece. The poem is about a righteous woman who sits by a river and complains to an old man to have been abused and betrayed by a charmer womanizer. This charmer has much malice, basically diabolic behavior. Asmodeus was in the Jewish legend a king of demons, a devil, a demon king focused on debauchery, drunkenness and squalor. He was frequently used by writers in England during the Elizabeth reign. Shakespeare mentioned a variation of his name Asmath in Henry VI and called him false fiend. Asmund is a more acceptable English name for Asmodeus. Cornelia is a woman from classical Roman literature, symbolizing feminine virtue and righteousness, a woman meant to feel compassion for. Shakespeare mentioned Cornelia by name on 2 other occasions in his works. In Nigel Cockburn's book The Bacon-Shakespeare Question from 1998, he argues that the attributes of the characters in A Lover's Complaint match the attributes of Asmund, Asmodeus, and Cornelia, as described in literature at the time. Cockburn is convinced Asmund and Cornelia is the project name for A Lover's Complaint, used before the poem was finished for print. In 2011, Brian Vickers published his research in a book, Shakespeare, A Lover's Complaint and John Davis of Hereford. Vickers used computers to analyze the spelling, word choice, and poetic phrases in A Lover's Complaint, and found it very different from Shakespeare's, but very similar to poetry of John Davies of Hereford. This book by Vickers made headlines, and in some later editions of the Shakespeare sonnets, A Lover's Complaint have been left out due to Vickers' research. A Lover's Complaint is considered to be of much lower literary quality than the rest of the content of the Shakespeare sonnets quarto 1609. A Lover's Complaint and The Rape of Lucrece is the only two bodies of work commonly attributed to Shakespeare that is written in rhyme real. Maybe this connection is the reason for using a section from The Rape of Lucrece on the Northumberland manuscript, to create a pointer to be used with the Asman and Cornelia title to point to A Lover's Complaint. So let's assume the two occurrences of Asman and Cornelia from the Northumberland manuscript are indeed referring to the last section of the Shakespeare sonnets, A Lover's Complaint. Let's also assume that the anagram subtraction cipher experiment we did with the title sentence on Northumberland manuscript is indeed an intended cipher created by the producers of the manuscript. In this assumption, the manuscript is connected to Oak Island, and if A Lover's Complaint is referred to in the manuscript, then this means that the poem also could be connected to Oak Island. Now let's read the first 7-line stanza from A Lover's Complaint.
From off a hill whose concave womb reworded a plaintful story from a sistering vale, my spirits to attend this double voice accorded, and down I laid to list the sad-tuned tale. Ere long espied a fickle maid full pale, tearing of papers, breaking rings a-twain, storming her world with sorrow's wind and rain.
This first stanza seems to be about someone, the narrator of the poem, that prepares to write a sad story involving two people. The narrator looks at a maid that show erratic behavior, and who tears papers and break rings. This is clear enough, but why is the narrator located on a hollowed hill? And why does the content of the hill rewords, or possibly echo a sad complaining story from a nearby vale? Also, if using our imagination a bit, the word reworded is very similar to the word rewarded, with only a letter different. Is the author perhaps hinting towards something located underground that is connected to, or even rewards, a sad story from a place located at some distance from the hollowed hill? A vague interpretation, yes, but if we come to this poem from the ciphers and alignment cryptograms in the Northumberland manuscript, then we are of course looking for a connection to Oak Island, or at least to the manuscript. If the Shakespeare sonnets have something to do with Oak Island, then this interpretation could be interesting. But we are of course still using our imagination quite a bit. A few stanzas down, we find another peculiar section.
And lo, behold these talents of their hair, with twisted metal amorously impleached. I have received from many a several fair, their kind acceptance weepingly beseeched, with the annexions of fair gems enriched, and deep-brained sonnets that did amplify each stone's dear nature, worth, and quality.
The first peculiar thing we notice is the spelling of the word hair. It is spelled like hair, meaning inheritor. But scholars say this is just a poetic gesture, and the meaning of the word should be hair, referring to that which grows on the head. As spelling was not standardized, hair in this line could very well refer to that which grows on the head, scholars believe. But in Sonnet 1 and 6, the word hair is used clearly, meaning inheritor, if reading the context. It is spelled the same as in this stanza, but with an additional E in the end. In Sonnet 99 and 130, on the other hand, the word hair and hairs are used, clearly referring to that which grows on the head, if one reads the context. So it is obvious that this spelling of the word hair refers to inheritor. Thus the first line instructs us to behold the talent of their inheritor, and that this talented inheritor have done something with twisted metal amorously impleached. Let's read this stanza with modern and clarified text. And lo, behold this talent of their hair, see the talents of their inheritor, with twisted metal amorously impleached. with twisted metal interlaced in a devoted manner, with the help of a drill. I have received from many a several fear. I have received several attributes of good from a plentitude of something. Their kind acceptance weepingly beseeched. I have asked to be accepted by this plentitude of something, and is now accepted. With the annexions of fair gems enriched, I am now enriched with the enclosure, annexion of honest precious stones, and deep-brained sonnets that did amplify. The sonnets in this book are hard to understand, but they amplify or point out each stone's their nature, worth, and quality. Each stone's nature, worth, and quality. Now, this could with just a little bit of imagination be related to Oak Island and the drilled rocks spread out in the landscape there. As I was investigating the Lover's Complaint with the eyes of a cryptographer coming in from the Northumberland manuscript, I suspected this was related to Oak Island in some way. I found this possible parallels very peculiar. Just 2 stanzas down, mentioning the same context as the stone's dear nature, we have the following stanza.
Lo, all these trophies of affections hot, of pensive and subdued desires the tender, nature hath charged me that I hoard them not, but yield them up where I myself must render, that is to you, my origin and ender. For these of force must your oblations be, since I their altar, you and patron me.
It is interesting that the author mentioned that the trophies should not be hoarded, which means collected. Instead, they should be yielded up where something should be rendered. Let's assume the trophies refer to drilled rocks and try to interpret the stanza. Lo, all these trophies of affections hot. See the important objects, the drilled rocks. Of pensive and subdued desires a tender. In thoughtfulness want control with the help of an assistant. Nature hath charged me that I hoard them not. Do not collect and remove the drilled rocks in the landscape, but yield them up where I myself must render. Instead compare them with the information you must extract by rendering. That is to you my origin and ender. The Alpha and Omega, a phrase from Christianity. First and last letter in the Greek alphabet. Omega is O. For these of force must your oblations be, since I their altar, you and patron me. This is your offering, I am the altar, you will find information in me. Of course I'm exercising my imagination a bit again, but not to a degree that is completely unbelievable in my view. I'm checking the Lover's Complaint in order to find possible parallels to Oak Island, as I came to this poem from the Northumberland manuscript, as told before. Another stanza is also very interesting and seems to give a possible connection to Oak Island in a more direct way. Directly in the next stanza, we have the following interesting phrases.
O then, advance of yours that phraseless hand, whose white weighs down the airy scale of praise. Take all these similes to your own command, hallowed with sighs that burning lungs did raise. What me your minister, for you obeys, works under you, and to your audit comes their distract parcels in combined sums.
Here we have another peculiar choice of words. Why does the author write, take all these similes, which means metaphors, to your own command? Does it mean the poem is using metaphors to describe instructions? The use of similes here is also interesting, as the author used the expression, hollowed with sighs that burning lungs did rise. Let's analyze the stanza. O then advance of yours that phraseless hand, so move your indescribable hand forward, whose white weights down the airy scale of praise, with your palm pushing down the delicate scale of merit. Take all these similes to your own command, use all these metaphors to your own command, hollowed with sighs that burning lungs did raise, sanctified with the sight of something that was erected by people experiencing burning in the lungs from smoke or hot air. What me or minister for you obeys. Activity of this sort will benefit you. Works under you and to your audit comes. By working under your palm and to your test comes. The distract parcels in combined sums. The distractive packages in combined sums. The authors seem to describe a method where one should use the hand, move it forward and combine sums. The authors say this is some kind of test that works under the palm of the hand. Also, the author make a note that this should all be connected with something erected by burning lungs. Does he refer to people experiencing burning in the lungs while building something? If thinking about the construction of the money pit, the excavators found charcoal on the levels in the pit. In historic mining, they used burning coal to drive down fresh air into the shafts. Otherwise it would be impossible to work deep down in narrow mines. This coal of course produced smoke and heat. In the beginning of the 17th century, this method was a new invention. Even if they managed to transfer the smoke out of the shafts in chimneys or pipes, the air would have become very hot and the miners experienced burning in the lungs. So these examples can, with a little bit of imagination, be connected to Oak Island. There are more interesting sections in the Lover's Complaint that can be connected to Oak Island with a little bit of imagination, but I save these stanzas for later in this lecture. Before we continue, we need to take a step back and investigate the background of the Shakespeare Sonnets, Quarto 1609. We need to approach it with the eyes of a cryptographer and not reading first-class literature. We need to figure out if something is strange with this publication in order to look for cryptographic structures. We need some background information on 17th century cryptography. We know Ben Jonson, dramatist and troublemaker, was friend and employee of Francis Bacon. He also wrote, or at least was attributed for, the dedication to the first folio. In 1640, just after Jonson's death, a collection of Jonson's work were printed and the body was titled Underwoods. This publication was planned by Ben to be printed just after his death, the same method Francis Bacon used when publishing New Atlantis, just after his own death. In 1623, the same year Shakespeare's first folio was published, Ben Jonson's library burned down. To express his rage on this event, Jonson wrote a poem, an execration upon Vulcan, cursing and blaming the fire god Vulcan for the fire. In sections of this poem, Jonson mentioned the Rosy Cross. This is not the first time he mentioned this elusive brotherhood. He also mentioned Kabbalah, a set of steganography cryptographic techniques, riddles, logographs, palindromes, anagrams, ethiostics, acrostics, telestics, jump names, etc. Acrostics is the art of hiding a message where the receiver need to read vertically up or down on the first letter of each row. Telestics is the same but using the end letter on each row. These two methods will be important for this lecture. Of course it is hard for a decryptor to understand if an acrostic or telestic word was created by intentional force or by the force of coincidence. But a statistical analysis of a publication can be done in order to achieve some form of understanding. Jonson also used the word serious follies, and most importantly he say, and as false stamp there, parcels of a play. He also say, their seals, their characters, and bright stones that brings. I shall in the last part of this lecture show what Jonson probably meant by false stamp and parcels of a play in this context. It is easy to prove some of the steganography Jonson mentioned was actually used in Elizabethan times. For example, the English Sir John Davies in 1599 wrote 26 elegant poems called Hymns of Astrea in acrostic verse. In each 16-line poem, the first letter of each line formed the name of the Queen, Elisabetha Regina. There can be no doubt this was intended. There is no need for statistics. Also, if we return for a moment back to Francis Bacon, There is also clear evidence Bacon was familiar and very interested in codes, ciphers, and advanced steganography. What you see here is sections from Advancement of Learning from 1623. Bacon talks about advanced steganography and different kinds of ciphers. Another method at least mentioned in books on cryptography at the time was Notarikon. It is one of the three ancient methods used by the Kabbalists to calculate and rearrange words and sentences. The other two are Gematria and Temura. These methods were used in classic Kabbalah in order to derive the esoteric and deeper spiritual meaning of the words in the Bible. Notarikon was also used by Renaissance alchemists. This section is from John Wilkins' Mercury, the Secret and Swift Messenger from 1641. Capta dictionum is the art of hiding messages using only the first letter in each word. Finis dictionum is the same but using the last letter in each word. In 1624 an important book was published, Cryptomanetics et Cryptographie. This contained 500 pages and was the most thoroughly researched compendium on cryptography to that time. It became the standard reference work of the century. On page 141 in this book we find an alphabet and a gematria value system. This alphabet was used in England during the Elizabethan and Jacobean times, and also in the German provinces during the era. Spain and Italy had a somewhat different alphabet. It is important to notice that G essentially was the same character as I, and therefore not part of the alphabet. V was in the same way used as substitution for U, and therefore also left out. There exist 13 extant copies of this publication, 5 to be sold by William Aspley and 7 to be sold by John Wright. One of the copies lack a title page. Some of the extant copies are in very bad shape. The publication is valued to many million English pounds. The Shakespeare Sonnets is constructed as a modern book where sonnets continue on the next page. Very few publications of sonnet poems from this period was constructed in this way. Most sonnets publications had one sonnet on each page. Let's investigate other strange constructions in this publication. Sonnet 9, 18 and 122 have a dot directly after the numbering of the sonnet. Also, Sonnet 10 have a dot, but only in the catchword marking on the opposite page of the actual Sonnet 10. Sonnet 10 itself has no dot. This is peculiar. Sonnet 99 has one extra row, thus breaking the poetic structure of 14 lines. The last row of Sonnet 126 has only brackets, no text. Sonnet 135 and 136 have 13 words will in italic font. This is the only page with will in italic font in the whole book. Sonnet 145 is considered to be a bad sonnet, written in iambic tetrameter instead of iambic pentameter as the rest of the sonnets. The well-known dedication page has long been thought to contain some form of code or cipher. It is structured in a peculiar manner. Why are the words by and wishes present alone on a row each? Why are the dots after each word, 30 in total? Why are the R in Mr. much smaller than the other letters, and why is it elevated? It seems like the author on purpose tried to diminish the importance of the R. MR stood for Master, not Mr. in the 17th century. Who is VH? These initials have long been debated. No good theory of who it represents exists today. The author wishes the well-wishing adventurer in setting forth. Setting forth could refer to reading the book, but it could also of course refer to a journey. In Sonnet 4 we have a very peculiar alignment structure. 7 E's in alignment with the angle in the italic word audit, which means a hearing or assessment. E is the most common letter in the English alphabet, but in this structure the alignment is present in all but one row on which the alignment line travels, and the angle follows the A in audit. And not only that, the line hits an H in Sonnet 5 and then continues in an exactly 37-degree turn over the characters in Sonnet 5, which spells, "Those hours that with gentle work did frame the lovely gaze where every eye doth dwell, will play the tyrants to the very same." This structure is indeed very peculiar. If comparing with one of the other 4 places where the word audit appears in the publication, we find that this occurrence of audit has no alignment structures. The chance for this 7E alignment structure to appear by the force of coincidence is very low. Now let's look at the poetry in the sonnets themselves. It is generally accepted by Shakespeare scholars that the numbering of the sonnets have been set with care. It is also accepted that the content of some of the sonnets are related to the numbering of the sonnet itself. In this example we will investigate the sonnets of time, to see if we can see indications of this thought. In all of these 3 sonnets we find reference to the passing of time. In Sonnet 12 we have the word clock and the word day. Clock appears only 2 times in the publication, but day appears 35 times. Are they placed here with care in order to relate to the 12 hours of the day? In Sonnet 60 we have the concept of minutes hastening to their end. Are these passages placed in these sonnet numbers with thought in order to relate the 12 hours of the day and the 60 minutes of the hour? In Sonnet 52, which could represent the 52 weeks of the year, we find something very interesting. The sonnet includes the word year, which occurs 7 times in the publication. But as we approach the sonnet with the eyes of a cryptographer coming in from the Northumberland manuscript, we should react on a few interesting phrases in this sonnet. Let's read the sonnet.
So am I as the rich, whose blessed key can bring him to his sweet uplocked treasure, the which he will not every hour survey, for blunting the fine point of seldom pleasure. Therefore are feasts so solemn and so rare, since seldom coming in at long years set, like stones of worth they thinly placed are, or captain jewels in the carcanet. So is the time that keeps you as my chest, or as the wardrobe which the robe doth hide, to make some special instant special blessed by new unfolding his imprisoned pride. Blessed are those whose worthiness gives scope, being had to triumph, being lacked to hope.
The Northumberland manuscript was discovered in the library of a large mansion erected in 1604 and owned by a succession of rich men, now called the Northumberland House. This sonnet could be interpreted as, the rich is in possession of a blessed key that can bring him to his sweet uplocked treasure. This key seems to define a fine point, and the rich does not look at this key often. Is the key stored away? Does the treasure belong to, or was the treasure store financed by the rich? Further down we have, like stones of worth that tinily placed are. Could this refer to drilled rocks? In the latter section we have, by new unfolding his imprisoned pride. Blessed are you whose worthiness gives scope. So could imprisoned pride mean the original manuscripts of Shakespeare, if we exercise our imagination? And could the author be searching for worthy people to search for it? This is loose and insinuative interpretations, but as we shall see later on, these interpretations and correlations pile up when we read the Shakespeare sonnets in the eyes of a cryptographer investigating Oak Island. If Sonnet 52 is indeed intended to point to the Northumberland manuscript, and I were allowed to speculate, I would say the rich refer to one of the Howards seen here, the Earl of Arundel. Both Philip Howard and his son Thomas was well acquainted with the Bacon family, and they owned the mansion around the time the sonnets were printed in 1609. Bacon's childhood home York was placed right next door. Later, Thomas Howard became a collector of antiques and old manuscripts, and even later in life, in 1644, also became the first Earl of Norfolk. For several generations, his family had lobbied for the restoration of the Dukedom of Norfolk, and Thomas was the first with this title. His father Philip died in the Tower when Thomas was 10 years old, for following the Catholic faith. Interestingly, In the Rosicrucian Manifesto Fama Fraternitatis from 1614, the anonymous author mentioned that the first brother, Brother G.O. in England, cured a young Earl of Norfolk. I quote, "The first of this fraternity which died, and that in England, was G.O. As Brother C. long before had foretold him, he was an expert and well learned in Kabbalah, as his book called Age witnesseth. In England he is much spoken of, and chiefly because he cured a young Earl of Norfolk from the leprosy. In 1614 the Dukedom of Norfolk was non-existent, but it is obvious that if it were restored, as the Arundel had lobbied for generations, the title would have been given to Thomas Howard, the Earl of Arundel. Around the time the Oak Island complex was created, 1595 to 1610, Thomas was 10 to 25 years old and his father was dead. He was thus young and could have been persuaded to finance the Oak Island project. Francis Bacon, friend of the Howards and much older than Thomas, died in Thomas Howard's house at Highgate, according to the official story. Is the Earl of Norfolk mentioned in the Fama Fraternitatis, referring to the young Thomas Howard? Is the English brother mentioned in the same book, Brother G.O. Francis Bacon? Did Thomas Howard in fact finance the Oak Island project? If this is the case, then it could explain why we found the geometric alignment structure in the Northumberland manuscript, and that this manuscript likely can be connected to the Oak Island project. We found this in the cellar of Thomas Howard's mansion at Charing Cross, London. Possibly the manuscript is some kind of backup copy created for the financier of the project. Who knows? These 3 sonnets include the subject of time: clock, day with 12 hours, year, 52 weeks, and minutes, 60 minutes to the hour. This shows with strong suspicion that the author intended the numbering of the sonnets to be connected with the context and story of the poetry, at least in these 3 examples. We also have a slight suspicion Sonnet 52 referred to the Northumberland manuscript. It is commonly accepted among scholars that Shakespeare indeed intended the numbering of the sonnets to be of importance. We need to remember this relation when we continue. On the very famous dedication page, we can form 7 words as acrostics and telestics with acceptable spellings. Acrostics: map, bow, to, as, sat. Telestics: see, seed, die. These are all short words and they could of course have been formed by coincidence. Let's look at these words with statistics. The table here shows the comparison for the acrostic and telestic words on the dedication page. The numbers in brackets are the total number of occurrences in the publication as acrostics and in a separate calculation telestics, together with the mathematically calculated number of occurrences if created by coincidence. For the word map and to, we have a slight difference. For the word as, we have a huge difference. But then again, this is no proof, only a simple analysis. As is a very short word. The shorter the word, the more we can suspect the difference between occurrence and expected occurrence is created by coincidence. If we analyze a longer word, let's say 5 or more characters, then the difference will more strongly point to intention. If speculating with the assumption that some of these words indeed are intentionally created, I would choose the 3 words map, to, and see for the most likely candidates. These words could be associated with steganography ciphers and codes if stretching the imagination. Map and to have a slight statistical pointer in favor of intention, but we can of course not be sure. But when we check the Kabbalistic Notarikon methods, we get a bit more clear results. We seem to be able to form 5 words as Capita Dictionum and Finis Dictionum with acceptable spellings, all in the upper section of the dedication text. All of these possible words can be formed without any leftover letters on each row. Capita Dictionum. Row 2, sit. Row 3, ham. We can only get ham if we jump over VH, which are initials. But as VH are not words but meant to represent words, we could stretch it a bit and jump over them to get ham. Row 4, eta, the Greek equivalent for E. Finis Dictionum. Row 1, 3O. Is this an instruction? Should we 3O in some way? More on this later. Row 2, EGS, X. During the Renaissance, this was an acceptable spelling for X. So on row 2, we have X as Fines Dictionum, and on row 3, directly underneath, Ham as Capta Dictionum, if we skip the initials. X and Ham is the author hinting at X and bacon. The eta is also very interesting. This seems to point to a connection with the Greek alphabet, if the structure is not coincidence. But all of these words are very short and made up of letters common in the letter frequency of the English alphabet, so we cannot know for certain if these structures are created on purpose or if they are a product of coincidence. By this time in my work, I discovered Norwegian cryptographic researcher Peter Amundsen's book and documentary films. I found information in Amundsen's work that positioned itself somewhat in parallel to my discoveries, and thus found them very interesting. The Greek-Latin character code was very useful. What I know of, Peter was the first to analyze the works of Shakespeare with this encoding method. According to Edwin A. Abbott's biography on Bacon from 1885, Bacon learned to write English with Greek letters from his mother. As the level of education in those days were commonly limited, it was an effective way to encode messages. Each Latin character has an equivalent Greek counterpart. Also, jumps between lowercase and uppercase characters in the Greek alphabet could render a message different in appearance, as upper and lowercase look quite different in the Greek alphabet. Peter Amundsen have tracked down a letter Bacon wrote with this method of cloaking messages. In the Church of England's archives in Canterbury, Mr. Amundsen found a draft letter from 1612, where Bacon's hand writes English using Greek characters. Here you see an example from this letter. Bacon writes the word sometimes in Greek letters and also mixes English with English in Greek letters on several other places. He mentioned his own name and signed the letter with your M, which could mean your master. So let's investigate the audit structure in Sonnet 4 deeper. This alignment is indeed very interesting, as the chance for it being the product of coincidence is very low. As noticed by Peter Amundsen, the number 4 is positioned right above a letter D, maybe to point out the significance of the gematria value. Also in Sonnet 5 underneath we have the same feature, but this time with the Greek lowercase eta, which is spelled N. Eta has the value of 5. We also notice that on the dedication page we have seed as telestic. This could be interpreted as CD, C sonnet number 4. We can of course not be sure this is an intended feature. The 37-degree angle is very interesting. It seems we have half a 3-4-5 triangle on this page. We could of course look for the other half on the next page, but this would not be a believable method of hiding the other half, if this was the intention of the author. A quarter print is printed with 4 pages on each sheet side. Thus the typesetting is always 4 pages at a time, and these pages, when folded and cut, end up somewhat spread out in the sequence of pages. In the sonnet itself, we have the expression, "Why dost thou use so great a sum of sums?" Let's save this for later. First, let's see if we can find the word audit in other places in the sonnets, and in Asmund and Cornelia. We find that the word audit appears 4 times total in the publication. If going from the back of the publication to the front, we find the first audit in Asmund and Cornelia. We find it in a stanza we looked at before. The stanza also has the word to as acrostic. Let's read the stanza again.
O then, advance of yours that phraseless hand, whose white weighs down the airy scale of praise. Take all these similes to your own command, hallowed with sighs that burning lungs did raise. What me your minister, for you obeys, works under you, and to your audit comes their distract parcels in combined sums.
It seems we could discern instructions here. Should we collect some kind of parcels, add them up and apply them to the audit, if this is a 3-4-5 triangle feature? In this collection process, should we use our hand, advance it, and then use some kind of scale that works under the palm? Let's look at the next appearance of the word audit. The next audit appears in Sonnet 49. Sonnet 49 is a climacteric sonnet. Scholars agree that a certain number sequence of sonnets following Elizabethan climacteric numbers carry similar themes that are different from sonnets around them. This sonnet is climacteric. As a cryptographer, we find CC as telestic and then SAW as acrostic in the same sonnet. C was found as telestic on the dedication page. A double C as telestic and a SAW as acrostic does not appear together in the same sonnet in any other place than here. The thing that strikes us directly is that the word sum is used also here, when As Thy Love has cast his utmost sum, call to that audit. These words sum in one form or another have now been used around all occurrences of the word audit so far. We also have greet me with an son than I. Let's save this for later. The final recurrence of the word audit in Sonnet 126 does not have the word sum around it, but it has another peculiar feature. Her audit, though delayed, answered must be, and her quietus, which means the finishing stroke, is to render thee, and then we have two empty lines with brackets. The mentioning of the word treasure is also interesting. Is the audit structure a test? Are we being tested by the author? Shall we render the lines of text in this book somehow, and apply the result to the audit structure in Sonnet 4? Sonnet 126 is 2 times 63, with 63 also being an important climacteric number in Elizabethan times. Let's try to figure out how to complete the audit 3-4-5 triangle. In the printing process, 4 pages were set in type frames and printed at the same time. This means the cryptographer, which created this enormously elaborate alignment structure, must have set 3 other pages in the same quarter print type frame. The page signature system for the Shakespeare sonnets quarter 1609 is as follows. Example: A1V. A means leave or sheet title. 1 is page number, and V means verso, left side. Verso is a title for left side pages and recto for right side pages. This alignment feature is created on page B1V. According to the quarter print system, we can thus figure out the page laying to the right of the printer when he created this structure. This is page B4R. Now let's compare these 2 pages. Considering we have a publication with sonnets, constructed like a modern book, it is quite peculiar that we end up with 2 pages both starting with 2 single rows on top. Then sonnet 3, 4, 5 starting at the same typeset row as 15, 16 and 17. The only difference is that B1V has 1 extra row. This is interesting. It is not very likely this match would occur without thought, as the sonnet is constructed as a modern book with running text. There should be no relation to the relative positioning of the sonnets between these pages. What if the bottom line of the audit structure, the one following the row of text in Sonnet 5, was created so that the line could be drawn over to the next page form and hit the top of the characters in Sonnet 17? Both these sonnets seem to start on the same typeset row, even if the page with 3, 4, 5 have 38 lines of text while the other have 37. So this is indeed a possible scenario. But to check this we would need to dismantle the publication and lay the loose sheets flat on a table. This could of course not be done as this publication is too rare and too expensive. A facsimile will not do either. But we could try to recreate the sheet digitally. We would need horizontal and vertical measurements and correlation references to do this. This section in my research was extremely tricky and took a long time to figure out. After some serious thinking, my plan was to order very high-res photographs of the top and bottom of the sonnets from a well-known library. This library has a high-tech photographic workshop. Photos are delivered with exact scales attached digitally to the files. I ordered the photos with thick black paper stuck in between some pages, so that B1V and B4R could be seen clearly if zooming in. In advanced image processing software, I could then zoom in very far and lay a vector path over B1V and B4R. The path went from the tip of the B1 page into the back of the book following the paper line and then out again on B4R to the tip. The length of the path then gave me the horizontal measurements between the pages in upper and lower section. But the vertical relation between the two pages was a bit more difficult, I first thought. I put my hope in watermarks. What if a watermark was positioned over both pages? Then it would be easy to create a vertical match. I ordered backlit photos of the pages, but found no watermarks. Instead, I found wire marks. These wire marks were leftovers from the production process of the paper, and run horizontally over both pages. This was luck beyond belief. It was now an easy thing to match the vertical position relation of both pages. This is the digitally recreated half sheet B1V and B4R, as it looked coming out of the printing press. My suspicions were true. The base horizontal line from Sonnet 5 on the imaginary 3-4-5 triangle do hit the upper part of the first row in Sonnet 17, exactly the same way as in Sonnet 5. Also, the number 1 in sonnet number 16 and 17 are aligned in a 90-degree angle with the text row tilt in 5 and 17. Thus we can create the most likely position of the second half of the imaginary 3-4-5 triangle, as seen here. Later on, when I produced a computer script that extracted steganography from bodies of text, I also found that a Finis Dictionum analysis produced very interesting results. In the boxes you see here, Finis Dictionum, the last letter of each word is extracted row by row. On the left side we have in the first 3 lines of Sonnet 5, heed, which means pay attention, then as much as 3 occurrences of the word I, where I is also mentioned in the poetry itself, where every eye doth dwell. The rest of the rows above and below does not show this distinct pattern in Finis Dictionum, as you can see in the boxes. On the right side we have another occurrence of the word I as Finis Dictionum. It is hard to believe this is coincidence. Now let's look at the poetry itself under the imaginary 3-4-5 triangle. I have selected parts of interest from Sonnet 5, 15, 16 and 17.
5. Those hours that with gentle work did frame the lovely gaze where every eye doth dwell, will play the tyrants to the very same.
15. That this huge stage presenteth naught but shows whereon the stars in secret influence comment, where wasteful time debateth with decay.
16.
But wherefore do you not a mightier way make war upon this bloody tyrant time, and fortify yourself in your decay? Now stand you on the top of happy hours, so should the lines of life that life repair, which this time's pencil or my pupil pen.
17.
Who will believe my verse in time to come, if it were filled with your most high deserts?
It is possible parts of these sonnets are speaking of the reason for the Oak Island project, created as protection from the tyrant times in which the author lived. The sections also seem to give instructions. Shall we repair lines with a pen? The section in 17 is also interesting. Who would believe my verse in time to come, if it were filled with your most high deserts? If we interpret deserts literally, we find that the form of a slice of cake is similar to a 3-4-5 triangle. A hint perhaps, we can but speculate. Analysis of the audit. A. The chance for the left side of the imaginary 3-4-5 triangle to be an intended structure is significantly higher than the right side. The right side has few points in which we can attach it to the text itself, but the left side has much more features counting the alignment of ease, etc. B. But the chance for the first line of Sonnet 17 to start at the same typeset row as the first line of Sonnet 5 without thought is very low. The book is constructed as a modern book with running text from page to page. These pages should not be related in any way. C. This unlikely situation significantly heightened the chance for the second part of the imaginary 3-4-5 triangle to be intended as well. D. Adding to these features are the occurrence of 4 words I as fines dictionum among the first rows of Sonnet 5 and 17. Considering the gibberish of all other fines dictionum lines around these lines of text, then it is safe to say this is very likely an intended feature. The first 2 sonnets in the publication are interesting, as they seem to give strong hints that the author would like an heir, or that he would like the youth to produce heirs. They also contain other phrases of interest. Let's read selected parts. Sonnet 1. From fairest creatures we desire increase, that thereby beauty's rose might never die. His tender air might bear his memory, but thou contracted to thine own bright eyes. Within thine own bud bearest thy content. Here we have the word rose as italic font on the 10th word on the 2nd row. This is the only italic word on the page. Further down we have the word bud. The author desires increase from fairest creatures in order for the rose to never die. Does the author want people to increase their fairness in order to make it possible for the rose to never die, or for the objects the Rosicrucian Brotherhood possessed to never die? This is of course nothing more than associations, but let's continue.
When 40 winters shall besiege thy brow, and dig deep trenches in thy beauty's field, thy youth's proud livery so gazed on now will be a tattered weed of small worth held. Then, being asked where all thy beauty lies, where all the treasure of thy lusty days, to say, within thine own deep sunken eyes, were an all-eating shame, and thriftless praise. How much more praise deserve thy beauty's use, if thou couldst answer, this fair child of mine shall sum my count, and make my old excuse, proving his beauty by succession thine. This were to be new made when thou art old, and see thy blood warm when thou feel'st it cold.
This sonnet starts with, when 40 winters shall besiege thy brow, and dig deep trenches in thy beauty's field. We will return to these lines later when we investigate the dotted sonnets. In Sonnet 2, the author wants the reader to answer his work by summing something up. Again we encounter the phrase of sums. The author also wants the reader to prove his beauty by succession. It is as if the right answer can only come from someone in succession to the author. The sonnet also say a treasure lay within deep sunken eyes. We should make note of the repeated theme of sum my count, which we have encountered 3 times before in the audit structure. We should also make note of within thine deep sunken eyes, as we have 4 eyes as fines dictionum in the audit structure, very likely intended. So who is Master V.H.? There has been numerous books written on this subject alone. A number of candidates have been put forth, none of which seems satisfying to an acceptable degree. But if we look at V.H. with the eyes of a cryptographer suspecting Francis Bacon had something to do with this publication, we can interpret them as the Greek omega and eta, which in Latin will be O and E. We also have eta as capta dictionum on the next row. So who is O.E.? This feature was interpreted the same way by Peter Amazon in his book The Organist. Peter also suggests the small r instruct us to count the total number of characters on the dedication page, excluding the 30 dots, and excluding the small r. This gives a total of 145 characters, which could point to Sonnet 145. I would like to add to this theory that OE, which has the gematria value of 14 and 5, work as a second pointer to Sonnet 145, the bad sonnet. So let's check Sonnet 145. This sonnet is written in iambic tetrameter, or octosyllabic verse, which is thought to be more appropriate for epigrammic and comic verse. All other sonnets in the book are written in iambic pentameter. Directly under the number 145, we find characters with the same gematria number in the Greek alphabet, in the exact same setup as we saw with VH, OE code on the dedication page, 14 and 5. O and W in own is in the Latin and Greek lowercase alphabet O and omega, the same letter with value 14. N and E is in the Greek and Latin lowercase alphabet eta and E, the same letter with value 5. Also we have the word wait as acrostic in this sonnet. Wait as acrostic occurred 2 times in the publication, with an expected value of 0.45. It appears in this sonnet 145 and in 82. In 82 I found no interpretable instructions in the poetry, but in this sonnet 145 wait as acrostic could have been used as a hint to investigate the sonnet further. Sonnet 145 is considered to be of low quality. There is probably a reason for this, as this sonnet seemed to give detailed instructions in each line of text. I don't think this is meant to be poetry. In his book The Organist, Mr. Amundsen points to some of the features creating these instructions, without knowing they can be directly applied to the geometric form in the Northumberland manuscript. First, let's listen to the sonnet line by line and interpret instructions without checking the manuscript. These interpretations took a long time for me to work out, but I've interpreted them as follows. Those lips that love's own hand did make. Those specific O's, lips that lay in alignment, as love's own hand can shoot an arrow through them. This could point to a certain set of O characters that can be pierced by a straight line. Breathed forth the sound that said, I hate. Pierced the sound I eta, which sounds like I-E, using the Greek character eta. The alignment O line from the first row pierced the sound I-E. Here is where it becomes tricky. We cannot know hate is meant to be mirrored to form eta, but we will know this after we study the Northumberland manuscript in the next step later on. I-eta is in Greek pronounced I-E. To me that languished for her sake, but when she saw my woeful state, if something is destroyed, straight in her heart did mercy come, then look for mercy. These lines instruct that if the money pit is destroyed, then we should look for mercy in the swamp instead. This section will be more understandable later when we get the whole picture. Chiding that tongue that ever sweet, changed the language, was used in giving gentle dome. From Rome, the Latin alphabet. Here is a neat trick. Scholars interpret the spelling dome to represent the word doom, but the author mentioned the word doom in 4 other places in the publication, spelling it the modern way, D-O-O-M. Thus it is unlikely this should be doom when it is spelled dome. Dome is of course a hemispherical roof which hints towards Rome and its cathedrals. And thought it thus anew to greet. Into Greece, the Greek alphabet. The language should be changed to Greek. The printed T is similar in look to a C. I hate she altered with an end. Do not follow I-E, that followed it as gentle day. Upwards as the sunrise, doth follow night who like offend, follow instead like the sunset, like a devil, from heaven to hell is flown away. Fallen from up to down, follow I-E downwards. I hate, from hate away she threw, extend outwards and down from I-E, and save my life, saying, not you, and find the true author. Now let's turn to the manuscript cover sheet. In the lower right corner we have a large glyph that looks like IE. IE is the sound of I-eta. As we came from the Northumberland manuscript into the Shakespeare sonnets, and we found a suspected reference in sonnet 52 that could point back to this manuscript, then we could try to interpret sonnet 145 as instructions for this cover sheet. This is my interpretation of how the instructions should be used on the cover sheet. 1. Alignment of 5 O's. Those lips, O's, that love's own hand did make, an arrow, a straight line. 2. Breathed forth the sound that said, I-eta, I-E. 3. i.e. she altered with an end, that followed it as a gentle day, stop upwards. 4. Doth follow night who like offend, a devil, from heaven to hell is flown away, go downwards. The interpretation of the instructions you see in this image took a long time for me to figure out. There are many O's on the cover sheet, and to find the 5 you see here was tricky. There are of course other sets of O's that align and pierce the IE on the sheet, but these few other alignments does not make much sense. Things that make sense with this alignment line are as follows. A. It goes almost parallel to the first base I line, thus intersecting it downwards in the far distance. B. It pierces the center intersection between I and the E in IE, then through 4 small O's, and then hit an O on the backside of the sheet. The word on the backside is resolved. Could this mean the cryptogram is solved? The Kempton symbols include 4 circles with lines through and 1 circle with a dot. As I suspect the Kempton symbols are connected to this manuscript, then this could be a clue. D. The line hit the initial characters in both the words imprising and imprisonment on the backside. This could be a hint. The O on the backside of the sheet have a peculiar hook on it. This is the only O on the cover sheet with this design. Maybe this was made in order to ensure the line hits the O even if the folding became fragile and the exact position of this O became unclear. Who knows? We also have another strange phenomenon with this line. It seems to be possible to form a more or less grammatically correct sentence by reading the words the line hit on its way, from above and downwards. Imprising imprisonment resolved prince. Others among, and then some scribble that does not seem to be fully spelled out words. Your master Francis Sovereign the Asmund Cornelia of Nash Thomas Shakespeare i.e. Will. The full collection spells. Imprising imprisonment made prince decide, resolved prince. Others among your master Francis Sovereign the Asmund Cornelia of Nash Thomas Shakespeare i.e. Will. Between the words we collected there are scribbled that are hard to read. There could of course be additional words, especially between others among and your master. If this is indeed an intended feature and a message meant to be communicated, then it is astonishing. Was the Shakespeare and Oak Island project created because the prince was afraid of being imprisoned? The prince could of course refer to Francis Bacon, as there are indications he was Queen Elizabeth's firstborn son. Or he referred to himself as prince, as he was the leader of a secret organization. Was Bacon and a group of others the authors of the Shakespeare sonnets and Asmund and Cornelia, which I believe is a lover's complaint? Was Thomas Nash a pseudonym, the same as Shakespeare? This possibly intended message raised more questions than it answers. There is also an alternative interpretation of the backside alignment features, if using no horizontal distance between the pages. In the image you see here, the 2 pages have been placed as close as possible without any part of their shared side overlapping. In box A, we find that the eye is still pierced, but in the ornamentation. The line mirroring the smaller 3-4-5 triangle, the one that extends horizontally on this image through box A, hit the central section of the eye in box A. As we have found several examples of eyes in the 3-4-5 triangle lines being pierced in the ornamentation, then we can suspect this slight off positioning of the eye could be a method of making it harder to see the mirror triangle, a theory at least. In box B, the O in resolved is not pierced by the O line in this scenario, but the S just before it is. Also, the hook on the O, the only O on the cover sheet with this kind of hook, seem to be drawn upwards and then down to join with the S. If thinking graphically, like a glyph, then the O and the S seem to be joined to form one glyph. Could this mean a hit on the S also creates a hit on the O? Should the S be seen as an extension of the O or vice versa? If this is the case, we have a valid hit on the O in the word resolved. In box C and D, the O line hits the word imprising and imprisonment on the same place in their initial letters I. Could the position of these words have been set on purpose to mark the O line? This is of course all speculation, but it shows that a solution with no distance between the pages is possible. It is just a bit more difficult. Analysis of the pointer lines. A. The O line and the base I line from the geometric form intersect far away from the geometric form. This defines a distance. B. The part of the solution to the cryptogram that is located on the back side of the sheet can be decrypted in two ways. One with around 2 mm gap between the pages and another with touching pages. Both seem to work as solutions. C. The level of certainty going from the I hate in sonnet 145 to the manuscript IE and then the specific O alignment is not that large. Thus we should wish for this cryptographic solution to be verified in some way. So what can we conclude from these experiments, interpreting sonnet 145 as instructions to set a pointer line on the manuscript sheet? What is obvious is that if we have done this in a way intended by a creator, then we have defined a spot or more a thin stripe area where the two lines meet far away from the geometric form. This is good. But it's easy to see that we actually have used our imagination quite a bit on the journey, interpreting hints. There are no immediate logical verification points in this experiment, even if hints is stacked on hint, etc., and it all seems to pile up to something understandable. We are still in need of verification. So let's flag this experiment in need of verification and move forward with the sonnets.